Classes in session.
Good morning and welcome to Unlearn 16 Classes in Session. Now today, guys, I have to admit I'm a little nervous. I don't get nervous around a lot of people, but I'm sweating a little bit. This is the Honourable Tony Clement. He was an MPP in his cabinet underneath Mike Harris and Ernie Eves, and then as an MP again in his cabinet underneath Stephen Harper for how long? What's the span of your career there in politics?
Federally, it was almost 10 years.
And then
Actually, it was almost 14 years because I spent 4 years in opposition. Yeah.
and then spent 4 years not right. And what I'm a little taken aback because this is a lot of time in politics, a lot of experience, and I'm incredibly excited to have
Yeah, it
this
was a
discussion.
total of 25 years. I should have mentioned that. When you add the provincial and the federal, it was a total of 25.
25 years. So, what I really want to get at today, and we're going to talk about where Mr. Clement is now and what he's doing now. That's pretty exciting. And then we're going to jump right in. And my listeners know where I stand politically. And Mr. Clement and I might stand on some opposite sides of the boat in some capacity, but I want to be able to have a discussion about that. I want to be able to talk about the political system as it stands now, both here and in the United States, and get your perspective on that. First of all, let's talk about where you are right now. So you stepped out of politics, you decided not to run again, and stepped out as of 2019. So what have you been up to now?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking that question, Joanna. I take a portfolio approach to my life, so I don't do just one thing. I try to keep busy with a number of things. So my number one thing is I'm a startup entrepreneur. So I'm involved in a half a dozen startups as an advisor and as a shareholder in the tech space and in the healthcare space, including psilocybin. By the way, I've got a couple of companies I'm involved in the psilocybin space, and I also do a little bit of consulting, not too much, but a little bit. And I also started with a Liberal former cabinet minister, a friend of mine, Sandra Pupatello. We started something called Reshoring Canada, which
Mm-hmm.
is about reassessing and changing our supply chains to ensure we have greater national security, greater health security, greater job security. And then I've got my media stuff that I do. So I've got a monthly radio show on a local radio station here in Muskoka, which is basically I'm a DJ. And then I've got a podcast called And Another Thing podcast that I do with a friend of mine named Jody Jenkins. So we do that once a week. We've done 108 episodes of that. And then I have this television show on this new news network, television network that's on Bell, Rogers, and TELUS. Rogers 107, Bell 506, and TELUS 842. Called the network is called the News Forum, and I
Right.
have a business and economics news and views show called Boom and Bust that I've done almost 200 episodes for.
Yeah, it's very economically driven. There's a couple of where I'm like, okay, I'm going to take a minute. I'm just going to step away. I'm going to look up some terminology. Then I'm going to come back to the episode and see if I can throw down in it. So
Yeah, they wanted me to do a show when they were starting up this network, and I said, "Look, I am not doing a political show. Like I'm not doing what happened in question period this week. I had no
right.
interest in that. I wanted to sort of push my boundaries a little bit, so they allowed me to do a business and economics show. So I've had politicians, I've had ex-politicians, I've had finance ministers, but I've also had economists, I've had startup entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs, Bitcoin entrepreneurs, you name it. So it really is a wide ranging show that way.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it is incredibly diverse and actually quite entertaining. I'm not going to lie. Economics isn't my forte, but it outside of looking up some. I mean, I'm not going to pretend to understand Bitcoin. I'm just going to put that aside and just move on with my life. I think it's sometimes you got to take the wins and the losses where they are, and Bitcoin is a loss. I'm now working on what the heck an NFT is, so I'll stay there for a while. But what I would really like, don't get me wrong, I'm a little bit dying to go back to, 1996 under Mike Harris and say, what was going on there or whatever. But I
Sure.
don't think that's going to be as useful today? Because I think we have a real problem in politics today that we need to find a way around. So would you consider, let's sort of decide where you stand. Would you still consider you're a member of the Progressive Conservative Party? Do you consider yourself a conservative through and through? And what does that
Yeah,
mean to you?
and it's my tribe, so I'm kind of with them through thick and thin, and usually
Mm-hmm.
there's more thin than thick
There's a
when
little
you're
bit of
dealing
thin.
with conservatism in Canada. But no, it's I've been involved in the conservative movement since I was 15 years old.
Mm,
1975, 1976. So it's a long time, and so that's no. I shouldn't say I'm a conservative because I'm a conservative. I should say, I mean, I am a movement conservative. By that, I mean I do adhere to certain principles and concepts that I believe are truly conservative. But it doesn't mean that I agree with, you know, modern conservatism 100% of the time. But
absolutely.
modern conservatism, the thing about conservatism is it's because it's based on realism. It does change. Now, not everybody in conservative politics changes, and they
Right.
sometimes are too rigid in their ideology. But I think if you look at conservatism over the last 300 years, in British
Understand.
politics and U.S.
Right.
politics and Canadian politics,
Mm,
it does change. So how do I define myself? Well, I define myself as a lover of freedom. I believe that people, when they have their own choices in life, uh, and they do have responsibilities to their fellow human beings. Don't get me wrong, but generally, I want control over my life. And
right.
that I think is a very conservative concept. Some would call it libertarian. Maybe that's a branch of conservatism in certain
Mhm.
instances.
Right.
I don't go as far as libertarians because I believe that we have some collective responsibilities to our fellow human beings. But generally, I want to be left alone. I don't like government bossing me around too much. So that's
Hmm.
part of it. I'm also a market conservative. So I believe that millions upon millions of individuals making millions upon millions of economic choices in the free market is the best way to construct an economy. There is necessarily state control over some things, and there are certain ways that the market fails,
Hmm.
creating monopolies and oligopolies, as an example. So
Hmm.
there is need for government or state intervention, but generally, I would consider myself a market freedom lover. So those are the kind of the biggest sort of aspects of my conservatism. And I came at it, in my formative years when Pierre Elliott Trudeau was prime minister. And I
Right.
thought at the time, and many others thought at the time, he was running a very socialistic economy. As it turns out, he was nothing compared to his son that way. But
Well,
uh,
shots fired already. All right. All right.
yeah. Shots fired. Anyway, but that's those were my formative years, and
Right.
that's kind of the general principles that I like to adhere to in my political thoughts. Now, having
Hmm.
said all that, um, and I actually think this is true to it, but I have become unnerved by certain aspects of modern day capitalism, which I think
Absolutely.
have hurt people.
Hmm.
And maybe this is where, surprisingly, you and I are going to agree. But I
Absolutely.
think the forces of globalization over the last 40 years, let's say, have left a number of people behind. And
Hmm.
these are marginalized people. They are working class people. They are people who have striven to be part of the economy and can't. They may be racialized people as well. And
Absolutely.
so they have been left behind. And at the same time, because of the workings of the global economy, some people have gotten very, 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 very rich. And I think that overall, while I applaud people who create wealth and who create new things that are valued by a market economy, I think all of that is a good thing. you don't want to have too much difference between people who have nothing and people who have a lot of something. And
Absolutely.
so that I think is a problem. And I think that it has caused a dysfunctionality in our political system, which has been used perhaps by some. Some call it populism, but populism doesn't. Conservative populism. There is progressive populism too, by the way, and they both
Yeah.
sort of attack globalization. Interestingly enough, so that's where the two ends of the spectrum meet. But
Coming full
having said
circle. Yeah.
all that, I do think that this has created, people who are disaffected with the system, and so they have nothing to lose because the system has given them nothing, and that has created dysfunctionality in our political system and our economic system. So maybe that's a place where you and I agree. I don't know.
100%. I'm going to go back just a little bit because I want to talk about the foundations of conservatism just a little bit more. So you spoke about freedom, personal freedom, and I think a lot of people would agree to that. But when you really look up the tenets, let's say, of liberalism, it also talks about personal. It really does talk
Sure.
about personal freedom. At the root of a lot of conservative ideologies, too, there is a traditional religious underpinning. I mean, for the most part, there is that underpinning. How do you fall in that capacity? Because I know that I want everybody to have all the freedoms in the world to practice what they want. I
Right.
also know that me as a person, especially in this point, in this day and age, and I don't mean to sound facetious when I say this, I'm getting really tired of the God bless coming from my
Mhm.
politics. I don't want to hear, I really don't want to know what your faith is, like that person's faith. I don't want it put upon us. I joke all the time. I'm like, listen, if everybody didn't get 2 weeks off at Christmas and we just like the break, that's also sort of an example of how there's still this religious underpinning to our country. How do you feel about that? Or do you feel that that's still an underpinning of the conservative faith, under ideology?
Yeah. So let me say a couple things. First, on your first point, when you said that this sounds like classical liberalism, the answer is it
Mhm.
is classical
It is.
liberalism, and
There we go.
think things
Yes.
have changed over time. The monikers or the terminology has changed, but it's basically classical liberalism. Although there is a strain in the 19th century where conservatives did embrace some of those things, but at the same time, they also believed in individual human beings being held responsible for helping their fellow man, right?
Right.
So that may not have been part of classical liberalism and a part of classical conservatism, and I do believe that we have an obligation to help our fellow citizens.
Right.
It doesn't have to be through the state; it can be through individual action, but it is part of my moral fiber that I believe that. Where does that come from? I think it's inherent in every human being. It's part of our DNA that we really should help
Absolutely.
one another. It's
Hmm.
also part of my faith. I
Hmm.
am a practicing Christian, and I believe that that's a good thing, because when you have unfettered capitalism without something like Christianity, things go wrong very quickly. So I have no intention or desire to foist my faith on any other individual. My faith is something that is between my creator and myself, but it
Hmm.
does animate how I feel about things. And is it part of conservatism? It's part of some people's conservatism. If you're a libertarian, it isn't part of your conservatism. It's
Right.
most
Right.
the classical definition of libertarianism involves atheism as well.
Atheism,
Um,
yeah, for sure.
so I just this is where you get into the blending. Nothing's pure, particularly in Canada. There's no pure liberalism. There's no pure progressivism. There's no pure conservatism. But yeah, it is part of my faith journey, and it is part of a strain of conservatism. Here's where maybe I differ from what you would call social conservatives, let's say, where I do believe I personally have an obligation to help other people, but I don't have it's certainly not part of my ideology to foist those kinds of ideas on to people who don't agree with them. So I wouldn't be changing laws to, uh, to reflect that. And in
Okay.
fact, my journey as a conservative has moved considerably on social issues. So I'm, very
Really, yeah,
very
absolutely.
pro LGBTQ right now,
Mhm.
as of now, where I wasn't 20 years ago.
Mhm.
And most people in the LGBT community would say that's a good thing that your ideas have moved.
Mhm.
Some condemn me for not having those ideas in the first place. Well, the times were different, and I can't rewrite how I thought about something 25 years ago, but that isn't how I feel about these things now. So I think there's been a movement with me, and I think there's also been a movement with conservatism, and I think when you look at it, if I'm a freedom lover, then I'm not making any. I have no right to make any moral judgments on any other person on those kinds of things. So
On that,
that's
yeah,
how I
and on
land
that
on these things
point
now.
And on that point, I think it's super important to give people the room to grow. We judge a lot of people about what they did 20, 25 years ago. Me, 25 years ago, hun, I would have been against LGBT, which is hilarious. But when I was growing up in a suburb of Toronto, I'm
Right,
obviously white. I was upper class. I wasn't out. I was straight presenting. I thought I was straight. And you know what? There was a lot of homophobia, and it was common culture. It makes
right.
it horrible and disgusting then, but I think it's hysterical. Whereas we can judge, like me sitting where I am right now, I can judge politicians about what they did 25 years ago, but still remember what my friends would say 25 years ago and the culture I lived in and the movies I watched and the words and the vernacular that was used.
Sure,
I have to look to that as well. But I guess my issue or my thought is when we're talking about religion now. For example, let's just talk policy a little bit. And I know that we're not in charge of anything, or well, I'd like to be, but let's talk about defunding Catholic schools. Where do you stand on that? Like in Ontario, we're one of two provinces that still
right.
publicly funds Catholic schools. Where would you stand on that in today's day and age?
Yeah, I just don't think that's the biggest issue right now because the Catholic schools that are funded have to adhere to a certain curriculum. So I'm not, you know, it's not that's not as big a deal to me as how we deal with cultural shifts in our education system. So this comes out with critical race theory,
Mm.
cancel
Oh, that's a
culture,
discussion. Yeah.
those kinds of things, and
Mhm.
particularly on cancel culture, I'm very concerned that we have gone from a place. I grew up at a time when liberal leftists were the biggest defenders of free speech because if they weren't, they would have been canceled in the 60s and 70s, right?
Right.
So they were the biggest defenders of freedom of speech. And now I fear, my observationally, that a lot within the progressive movement, in fact, do not defend free speech, are quite willing and do cancel people who have positions that are different from their own, which I would argue, in the marketplace of ideas, we should have those debates rather than
Mhm.
try to deplatform people because they have a different point of view, which you find obnoxious, And I'm kind of very old school, 18th century old school on this, where Voltaire said famously, I disagree with what you say, but I will
But I
defend to
defend
the
your
death your right to say it. But
yes.
we're not in that culture anymore. If you disagree with what I say, you're going to try to cancel me. And I think that that's kind of imbued in the education system a little bit too. So that's my biggest fear on these things, rather than I think there's a false right now Catholic school, public school funding, whatever. But how are we teaching our kids to be critical, to be to take media uh, uh, critically and seriously? Don't believe everything you hear or say, even from your own teachers. That's
Mhm.
the kind of
That's
critical
true,
minds
yes.
that I want in our society.
Now, just as a point, do you think though maybe that changing the school system is a, even if you think that a Catholic school isn't preaching a very particular lifestyle, which I still think I might disagree with you there. I've not too long ago know people that don't get hired at Catholic schools or have got fired in this district for being gay working at a Catholic school, and those things still run. So do you think that maybe symbolically, at the very least, if we are going to profess that our government is not supporting any one religion, do you think at this point in our society, maybe that's a step in the right direction? Maybe that's a show of good faith, for using a poor choice of words there, a show of
Yeah,
good
yeah, yeah.
faith in
No,
order to change this culture you're talking about?
yeah, no, and there obviously, if you're in a Catholic school system, there will be classes that will talk about your faith, which will
Hmm.
not be appropriate for everybody in that system because you'll have non-Catholics in the system, Muslims, for instance, or Hindus who just happen to have chosen a Catholic school. Maybe their parents want a bit more rigor in their kids' education, and they think they're going to get it at a Catholic school,
They're prettier.
whatever.
In Ontario, Catholic schools are very well funded. It seems as though their school they're newer, they have more access to technology
Right.
overall than the public schools in the vicinity, right?
Yeah, no, it could be. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I guess I'm putting my politician's hat on and thinking, which hill do you want to fight on, right? Like you're
Absolutely. Yeah.
when you're elected, you have a certain amount of rocket sauce that you were elected
Yep.
with. So how do I want to spend my rocket sauce to make change in the most areas before they get tired of me and kick me out? Right? That's
Hmm.
what every politician is or should be thinking.
And
So
that's what I
to
want
me,
to come back to that because I think that's
yeah, yeah,
super
yeah,
important. Like, yeah.
yeah. But to me, so taking on that, which might have there'll be court challenges, constitutional challenges, yada yada
Yes,
yada.
absolutely.
I'd
Yeah.
rather spend my rocket sauce on something else. That's just me.
Right. But again, like, we're not in that. I am talking more ideologically, theoretically, in the sense that changing that maybe changes the discourse, maybe changes that critical thinking, because the critical thinking that goes on in schools or that we want to encourage in schools has to go against those foundational areas of power in which, let's be honest, the Catholic school system and religion in our country has had such a hold on it for so long. And in my opinion, it rolls into cancel culture, and I really want to talk about that with you as well, because this idea of cancel culture and what people are allowed or not allowed to say and how it plays out, I see it more as a reflection on capitalism than I really do in the sense that the people have power, yeah, because we have power about what we're going to buy. I'll give you an example. Dr. Seuss. Did you hear about the whole thing with Dr. Seuss? They took off a couple of his books, or
Yeah.
the right. It was like three books. Two of them I've never heard of before, anyways. But they took two books off the shelf because they had very sort of racialized pictures and things in them, and everybody lost their minds. This is cancel culture. Well, first of all, Dr. Seuss did it. Nobody was even looking at those books. Dr. Seuss did it. We want to know why Dr. Seuss wasn't going to cancel Cat in the Hat. They canceled three books that weren't making them any money anymore. And in my opinion, it was a brilliant move to say, we're going to be self reflective on things that aren't okay anymore. We're going to take these off the market. They're going to take three books off the market no one's bought in the last 20 years. And
Right.
now we have this vision, right? And I still think that's true of cancel culture. Like, people have done horrible, horrible things. They haven't got canceled. Why? Because they're still making money for their, whether they're a musician or an actor or an athlete, it doesn't seem to matter as long as they're bringing in the money. They stop bringing in the money. And then look, the cancel culture works really well for that particular institution.
Yeah, I
What do you
mean,
think of it?
you have a point. It's market driven, is what your point is, and that's a
Yeah,
fair point. I'll give
it's
you one other
capitalism.
example I heard of the other day, which is that the Rolling Stones do not have in their set list anymore brown sugar. Okay, so which
Hmm.
is about a slaved an enslaved person's daughter or
Hmm.
granddaughter or something.
Right.
lots of imagery of slavery and slave masters and stuff like that. So they just, you know, the person that inspired the song, the black woman who inspired the song, is pissed off that it's no longer part of their set list. So
Right.
she wasn't offended that it was it was a song about her, but the I can see, Mick Jagger's point of view, which is, I don't want to go through the bullshit, right?
Hmm.
So his point of view is, why go through all of this? We've got 930 other songs we can do. But of course, Brown Sugar was a huge hit in 1971 or whatever it was. So,
Of course.
that's part of me mourns the fact that the Rolling Stones will no longer perform Brown Sugar. But part of me also says that that's a choice. I mean, I can
Mm.
listen to Brown Sugar anytime I want on Spotify or wherever. So, is this really a big deal? I think what is disconcerting to people of a certain age, and that includes me, is that how disposable, how disposable, you know, older things are to this new generation. Like there's to people like me, you've got to learn from history, you've got to understand history, but you've also got to respect it was part of our history. And this goes to
Hmm.
the statues and the
Oh, I'd
other
love to
things that
talk about that. Yes.
yeah, I, that's the thing that is disconcerting, that, people, 40 and under are just lopping off vast segments of culture, tradition. Now, you could say it was racist or it was colonialist, but, I wasn't born in this country. I don't feel that I was part of a colonial. Now, you could say, well, you benefited from it. Well, I had a tough life, and a lot of white men had a tough life. So we're into that discussion now, but so that, I think, is what is driving the reaction to that, is that the change is happening very quickly, and it seems to be that the Dr. Seuss thing became news because of how nonsensical it sounded before you delved into it the way that you just delved into it. It's a couple of books,
Hmm.
nobody really cares. But the idea of taking books off the shelves, I find very disconcerting.
But they
There's
weren't even
very
on the
few.
shelves. You couldn't find those
I
books.
know,
I swear to God,
I know, but it's
they weren't
just
on a shelf at Indigo.
that's how it evokes, right? That's how it evokes that
Yes. There's the
you're,
problem, and I think that's
it's
what.
like the Mr. Potato Head controversy, same thing.
I love it.
How
I
dare
love
you
it.
attack Mr. Potato Head?
Like, and this is the thing. Everything seems to be getting weaponized, right?
Right.
Everything seems to be getting weaponized by the left and the right in different ways, and we can't have a rational discussion. Like, I went and looked as soon as I heard about this Dr. Seuss thing. I'm like, crap, I'm going to go because I have them all from when I was a kid. I'm going to go look, but I don't have them all. But ironically, I had the worst. I have no
Oh,
idea. I
really?
had one of the If I Ran the Zoo is the worst out of them all because the other ones were very more subtle anyway. And I looked at If I Ran the Zoo and I went, and then I took it into my school. I have it. I mean, I've been a teacher 20 years. I took it into my school and I talked about it in every single class. And the kid said, and this is a great conversation, the kid said, Joanna, why don't you throw out that book? I said, oh, I'm not throwing out this book. Here's why I'm not throwing out the book. I'm not throwing it out because the only way we can still identify and accept and embrace what we did, what we allowed to happen when I was in high school, the words I was allowed to use, is by talking about it. But I'll
Right.
be damned if it's to make money anymore. I wouldn't buy the book. I
Right.
don't think and that's the difference. I often question tradition, and obviously I sit where I sit, and I often question tradition, and I say, does it serve us now? Is it legitimate now? And if it's legitimate now, then I respect it. If it doesn't serve us now, then tradition, and I can use it even in really funny ways at Christmas time, then tradition shouldn't be continuously practiced. We need to be critical, just as critical of that as we are of things going on today. You know, you have a Christmas party you don't want to go to, you hate it. You just hate it, but it's tradition. You know what? I think we need to move past things that are problematic, that are divisive, that are all of those things, and we really need to gauge them. We don't just get to keep them because they have the word traditional in front of it.
Yeah, no, and I guess I don't mind individuals making that choice.
Hmm.
If you have a problem with a tradition, that's fine. That's your choice. It's my choice if I want to buy Mr. Potato Head, even though it is gender specific. I think I should have the right to buy Mr. Potato Head. And maybe I'll
But
have a discussion with my grandkids about Mr. Potato
sure,
Head doesn't mean that you're misogynistic. So I know it's a ridiculous example, but
but it's still
that's
a good one because
the
people
point.
got really upset.
Yeah, and so
Okay.
I look, these debates, cultural debates are not new. This is not something unheard of before. And I'll give you another example of this that I use quite a bit, which is this is the American context now, where people say this is the most divided time in American history,
Yeah,
right? That's
I don't
bullshit.
think so.
It's
Yeah, I don't.
historically untrue.
Mhm.
They had a civil war. 750,000 Americans died in the Civil
Yeah.
War.
Mhm.
Surely that was the most divided time in American history. The Vietnam War, there were people being shot by National Guardsmen on campus. There was they
At
lit up
Ohio State,
Washington
right?
D.C. a mile from the Capitol. Washington D.C. was in flames. So don't tell
Mhm.
me this is the most divided time in America. It's just part of a cycle. And when
Mhm.
you're old like me, you see the cycles more than people who are right in it. And oh my gosh, there are Generation Zers who are throwing Molotov cocktails. Well, what do you think happened in the 60s, man? The
Right.
same thing happened with the boomers. Uh, you know, so
Absolutely.
we go in cycles, and there's a push me, pull you part of cultural debate, which I think is valid and necessary. But there's, I guess my point, and I'm bringing it to an extreme right now. My point is, please, for goodness sakes, don't throw out every single tradition. There's a reason why tradition is important in society. It helps people understand where they are and where they came from, how they progressed is part of the tradition in a democratic society as well. So don't throw it all out. Understand
No.
it better. Say, we used to do this, but we don't do it anymore, and here's why we don't do it anymore. That's
Yeah.
all valid.
That's discussion. That's 100% valid, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
again, we need to get at the I still say we need to get at the roots of that, and by you talking about Mr. Potato Head and whether you have the right to choose to buy it or not buy it. Look, the Mattel company, I think it's Mattel, if I'm
yeah.
misquoting,
It's
I don't know.
Mattel. Yeah,
They're the ones that decided that. They decided that not to be woke culture. And first of all, I hate people weaponizing that term. They decided it because they want to make more money. They want to make themselves relevant again. And this is the way that they're doing it. They're not doing it because people are protesting outside of Toys R Us. That never happened.
right.
But they're doing it because this is the shift that we're seeing, right? We are seeing this shift, and it's incredibly, speaking about going against tradition, the Mr. Potato Head is a great example, I think, of one of the biggest traditions, or one of the biggest sort of functional societal frameworks we have, which is the distinction between men and women, masculine and feminine. This is at the root of who we are in a lot of ways, and I think everybody deals with it on a different level. The first thing you do when you see a baby, for the most part, oh my God, they're so beautiful. Is it a boy or a girl? First thing we ask. Why? Because we have been so incredibly trained to pick up that baby differently, to talk to that baby differently, to use different words to describe that baby. And this is at the root. Like, I still do it. Like, look at me. Like, I'm obviously not fitting in a mold over here. But that is still how we were trained. And I think to get around that training, it has to get bumpy and messy, and there has to be people yelling and talking about Mr. Potato Head as this pinnacle of an example to really start to acknowledge or look at that kind of societal construction,
But
right?
is the end of that construction we de-gender size 100% of society?
My opinion, I hate, well, and let's just for argument's sake, let's just change the difference between sex and gender, right? So sex is what you're born with, gender, the characteristics that you attribute.
Right.
I personally believe, I know it's very Hindu, that all gender is a delusion. I personally believe that the roles, I think you and I, for example, would both hold on to very some masculine, some
Sure.
feminine traits in
It's
different
it's
ways,
all part of a yeah. It's all part of
like
a
a
spectrum.
spectrum. There we go. So if it's all part of a spectrum, we haven't been teaching that much, right? Because again, babies who are born, we're starting to see the change, right? Babies who are born, you get certain kinds of names, you get certain kinds of clothes, you get certain kinds of toys, you get certain kinds of adjectives and socialization to bring you up. And then what we do is we say, oh, but look at how different boys and girls are. How do you take the socialization out of that? I mean, unless we're going to experiment with twins somewhere and keep them separate from society, how do
Right.
you take socialization out of the clothes we wear, out of the
Well, I
makeup
think
that
there
girls
there
put
are
on?
studies that look, I there are studies that show that men's brains and women's brains are different,
A hundred
generally.
percent, a
Well,
hundred percent.
99% anyway.
Yep,
And so, this is not all nurture. There is some nature here that we have to acknowledge. And you can't erase nature in 20 years after Homo sapiens have been around for 500,000 years. So I guess
a hundred
I'd make
percent,
that point. But,
a
look,
1000%. But
yeah,
that
no,
doesn't
so
change. Like, I'm looking at the guitars on your back wall, and I'm thinking to myself, how many men are guitarists and how many women aren't? Look, there's nothing about our physical, our mental makeup, our genes, our whatever, that means men are inherently better at guitar than women. That it just seems, those are the outputs. If you're talking about, because the studies I've seen are that, for example,
there's a
women,
lot of good women guitarists, my friend. I'll
but
just
I'm
make that point.
100%. But I'm just saying, on the whole, why aren't we seeing that, right? It's not me, but on the whole, why aren't we seeing that?
Yeah.
Whereas the studies I know that have been done will talk about things like guys' brains work a lot better in some ways of being very narrowly focused and target driven, whereas women's brains tend to be more wide ranging and can multitask better.
Right.
Look, if that's true, and we're going to assume the science is true, then the jobs we're doing that men have taken over and women have been relegated make no sense whatsoever due to our biology. Do you see what I'm
Hmm.
saying? The
Yeah, I
science
mean,
doesn't
and
match with our
there is some
reality.
cultural. Yeah, I mean, look, there is some cultural history behind women's jobs and men's jobs, which is breaking down and will continue to do so. Although I don't see
Absolutely.
a lot of men flocking to become nurses for some reason. I don't know
No.
why
Why
that
do you
is.
think that is? Why do you think that is? Because
Uh,
nurses make, just so
why
everybody
do
who's
you
not,
think that is?
well, nurses make, just so everybody knows who's not in Ontario, because I have a lot of American listeners, nurses in Ontario make a really good living. Like, I think at the top of their career, we're talking 90 to $100,000 a year. It is a great job. It is a great job for benefits. It's a great job to take, you have shift work, so you can take care of family. My mom was a nurse for 40 years. Um, and I think it's because there's this inherent driven sexism that goes with gender. So, for example, when I've created my list of the masculine, my list of the feminine, told boys to behave this way, girls to behave this way, they're not equitable lists in our society. They're hierarchical, right? The masculine is still considered to be better. It's better to be rational. I mean, given these lists, realizing I don't believe in these lists, but it's better to be rational. It's better to be scientific. You got to be competitive. You got to be this, you got to be that. So when women become doctors and lawyers and politicians, we are stepping up. When men take on more feminized labor positions, they're
It's
stepping down,
it's
heightened
stigmatized.
risk. Absolutely, it is.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
By the way, interesting, fun point. One of the internal teachings for conservative politicians is to be more emotional rather than always be 100% just reason
mhm,
based, because
sure.
you actually are more persuasive to more people when people think you're emotional and passionate about something, rather than, well, I've added 2 plus 2 and I've gotten 4, therefore the answer is this. So
Right.
politics is changing that way. Yeah, I will. This is a good time for me to talk about something that I also feel very strongly about, which is the phrase toxic masculinity.
Mm,
And look, in my mind, if a man is acting badly, especially towards women, that is not a masculine behavior. That's just a shitty behavior. Okay, like masculinity to me means being strong, but being protective and being respectful and helping your fellow citizens, and helping, particularly in this point, women. So
mhm,
to attribute to masculinity poor behavior, maybe it's learned behavior, I think is a disservice. Like, I identify as a male.
mhm,
I like being a man, and I like being masculine. I have
mhm,
certain traits that I would consider more feminine. Like
mhm.
I like babies, and I like nurturing, and I like doing those things. I know this is all, you would say, no, 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 that isn't masculine or feminine. I'm just talking about traditional role models.
No, tradition
So
100%. We're talking about
yeah,
traditional lines of thinking
right,
here,
right, right,
yes.
right. So, but I think to be a good man, you should, you know, help raise babies, and you
Mhm.
should uh, help women who are going through emotional crisis. All of those things are being a good man and a good human being at the same time. So I really worry that the phrase toxic masculinity is creating a definition of masculinity which really isn't masculine. It's just another definition of femininity, and that's what I
I
worry about.
I think a lot of people who really do talk intellectually anyways about toxic masculinity aren't will make that very clear distinction. But again, it's interesting because when we talk about something that's toxic, we're talking about something that was originally a good thing, or and then has been turned bad, has been gone to its extreme. I don't like any extremities. I don't like any true believers. I always get very nervous when somebody says I 100% believe in anything. I'm like, I if you can't question it, you make me uncomfortable, because you have to be able to question every single thing at every single turn, including my viewpoints on gender, including I love to listen to other people's viewpoints. And I think that's what we're missing. But the idea of toxic masculinity are these, still to me, these enforced gender roles based on your sex. And you mentioned protection, which I think is an interesting one. The idea of protection, I think, a can come off as amazing, right? Somebody's going to hurt you and I protect you however I do that. Look, I think that's a very human thing to protect a lot of people. There's a lot of moms who would step in and protect their kids, and we've seen those videos where they lift cars. So we have this in us, but I think the protection that's problematic is the control, right? For
Yeah. Okay.
example, let me give you an example, right? Sexual assault is rampant. Everybody knows that. We can't debate that. So I have two choices as a, let's say, as a parent or as a teacher. What do I do? I'll use as a teacher. I'm not a parent. Do I control what my young women wear at school, or do we have significant consequence when boys or girls, for that matter, step out of line in response to what they're wearing? And I think for a very long time, we've been doing the former. And I think it's about time to do the latter. It's a different kind, right? Rather than holding the victim or the individual who is just trying to live their life the way they want to live it, rather than holding them responsible for not wearing anything too revealing, because it's also very
Do you
dismissive
get that
of
at school? Do you get that argument that they're wearing too revealing clothing?
Oh, for a long time. For a long time. I've been a teacher for a little while, right? We used to have all those rules. We don't have them anymore because I refuse to enforce them. Oh my God, don't wear a shirt off your shoulder. We don't want to see your bra. Heaven forbid we see your midriff, right? I mean, these were all very, very common and still to this day, very common in my opinion. And I had a student sit me down one time and goes, Joe, like, why is it okay? Why is me showing my bra strap such a huge distraction when in actuality, I should be able to wear whatever I want to wear? And if people can't handle it around me, shouldn't you be talking to them? And she was 16 at the time, and this was probably about maybe 7 years ago. And I went, "You're 100% right. I will never ever enforce a dress code ever again, because you're right that we're putting the onus on the wrong people." And then that amazing art, I don't know if you ever saw this. It was by her name's gone, but it was an artist on the East Coast, and she put together a visual of clothing of women that had been sexually assaulted or raped, what they were wearing.
Right.
They were assaulted. And the reason why it was so incredibly powerful is because there were no high heels, there were no mini skirts, there was no, all of this revealing. Nobody was wearing a bikini. Nobody, it was sweatsuits and jeans and sneakers and a hat. And in that, you got a very real picture of what sexual assault was, which is never about sex. It's only about power
Power.
anyways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And but even for me, for a long time, I was the teacher because that protection quality that you were talking about, I had it. Well, I have to protect. Why are you wearing revealing clothing? I have to get at your deeper underpinnings, right? I have to get at your psychology there. When in essence, there needs to be that ideological shift to where we're laying the blame or where we're laying the responsibility. And I think,
Yeah,
that's important.
and I 100% agree with that, and I do, I do, and we've done so much in our society to lift up females, which is
Hmm.
great. It's fantastic. We have left some boys behind, and
100%.
they're playing Grand Theft Auto, and they're
Hmm.
watching porn.
Hmm.
That's what they do, and they get all their
Look,
signals from. I'm not picking on
tells you
Grand Theft
something.
Auto, but so
I
let's
will.
let's
You
and
can
that to
beat
me
up
is
a
not
hooker. What is going on?
that to me is not being a man. Okay, like I would say to any young man who's living his life gaming and watching porn, you are not being a man right now. You got to step up, and I will use the phrase "man up." Take your responsibilities seriously. This is a bit of Jordan Peterson, maybe. Make your
Uh-oh.
bed. Make your bed.
Jordan
treat
Peterson.
treat women with respect, have goals in life,
Hmm.
and work hard for those goals. Why don't we, let's get our boys back on track here. We got to do this for
Here's
our
what
society. Otherwise, the cycle will keep
100%.
repeating itself.
And I think that lesson is true for young boys and young girls. And here's where I think it starts. You obviously have parents. Nobody can control what goes on in the classroom. Want to know what we control? What goes on in our schools. So when I talk about education and I talk about educational curriculum, and I think that the Ontario government, which in right now decided to go back to the 1998 health curriculum. I can't quite articulate how horrible of a step back that was. And the reason why they did it was because of their conservative base, was because of their traditional base, was because people don't want people talking about sex and sexuality at school. But Tony, if we're not doing that in
No,
school,
Joe. Just to
keeps
be
getting
just to be fair, it was not talking about that was not the issue. The issue was at what age are you talking about sexuality in school?
100%. And I think like if we talk about grade one, so again, for those who aren't in Ontario, just so we understand, our Ontario, because a lot in the States, I just realized how the States educational system works, which is very different. So when the Ontario government comes up with curriculum, that's what every school has to teach from kindergarten all the way to grade 12. And they were talking about at what age do we start talking about it? But in my opinion, again, for example, I believe, and I haven't read the curriculum in a minute, but I believe grade one, they wanted just to name body parts. That was it. That was it. They wanted to say eyes, nose, mouth. They just didn't want to skip over an area anymore. And I thought that's incredibly powerful. Here's why it's powerful. A lot of people take advantage, bad people in our society are going to take advantage when a 6 year old thinks that that's private and you don't talk about that. That makes a very dangerous mix of what people can get away with. And the only reason we're not naming the parts in public is because it makes us uncomfortable. It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make, and then there's this whole idea of when do we start talking about gender? Right away. If we're not so protective of the roles we think they ought to play, why can't we talk about fluidity when they're in grade 2 and 3? Grade 2 and 3 kids want to wear anything. You know, you have little boys be like, I have two moms, I want to wear a dress. And everybody's like, uh-oh. Well, why? So we need to bring that in at a young age. Nobody's talking about sex. Nobody's talking about STIs in grade 3. That's later.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
definitely think talking, because you're talking about how do we get boys from doing these, from rolling into this particular category. I'll tell you how, because we have to start having those conversations. And if that toxic masculinity, the term you don't like, or if those roles are being set in their family and perpetuated in their family, the only way we can possibly hope to change that is by educating not one way. Not one way. I'm not saying everybody needs to be this multivariant human being. I'm saying open up the door for possibility in our educational system.
Yeah. Okay. I'm doing a lot of listening on this one. I don't, I'm not quite sure where I stand on it. I
It's
do believe,
hard. I get why it's hard. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and I want to, I want to protect trans people. I want to make sure they're safe and healthy.
Yeah.
And that involves a lot of education. It's maybe part of the final frontier in terms of these points of these rights based fights that have to be done to get to a
Hmm.
better society. That's one of the ones where we've already crossed a threshold when it comes to lesbians and gays, but trans have still some battles that they've got to fight.
Absolutely.
And we've got to be, in my view, that we've got to be there for them. But I'm just, there's something. I'm trying to be honest with you.
I
The
like
the
the
whole
honesty because I think that's important, right? Different people coming from different perspectives. I think it's important to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
honest.
It's just the age thing that's I'm still hung up on. When do we start that discussion with our young people? Who
Okay.
initiates it? And I know parents can be good parents or bad parents. They can be knowledgeable parents or ignorant parents. I get all that. I'm just a little still uncomfortable. That's all.
Yeah, and I think that discomfort sometimes, and I love having these discussions, right? Especially with people who just honestly have them, not yelling at me that I'm trying to convert their kids to be like. First of all, I'm not trans. A lot of people think I am because I have short hair, which I think is funny. But a lot of people, if you come at me with aggression, I sometimes just get sarcastic. I don't really ever get aggressive, but I implore people to have honest, thoughtful conversations because that's the only way we get through with some degree. For example, if a little boy comes to school in grade 2 and his, the girl sitting next to him is wearing nail polish and he's like, well, you get to paint your nails? Why don't I get to paint your nails? But our whole society has now relegated that somehow to either his sexuality or him wanting to be trans. There's the problem. Because then at that point, we close off his opportunity not to be gay, not to be trans, although that should be his choice, but to just be a little kid who thinks it's cool to paint your nails.
Right.
That's it. And
Well,
and unfortunately,
let me
you
let
talk
me
about
ask you this.
boys. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm really interested in this because I haven't had kids in secondary school for 7 years now. My kids are older than that, so
Right.
I'm missing out on some of this. But are you do you get a sense still that like peer pressure to conform is still a big thing in the school culture?
Course it is. It's still a big I think it's hysterical when adults say, "Oh, my kids are led by peer pressure." But then I look at their house and it looks like page 7 out of the IKEA catalog. I'm like, "Oh, love, we are all conforming to peer pressure on some level, right?" The kids are actually doing it, in my opinion, less, and as they get older, you can see them doing it more because, well, they have to do it more to fit in or to do this. I work at a private school. I love the school I work at. It's an alternative private school. But as you can see, like I have tattoos. Well, I didn't have tattoos when I started there. Or the one I had, he could see. And my boss at work's a conservative. He's a self-professed conservative, and we joke with each other. And every day he'll see a new tattoo. He'll be like, "Joanna, you got a little dirt on your arm." I'm like, "Oh, I'll go take care of that. Don't worry, Wayne. I'll go wash that off for you. No big deal." But what he's done, he's 73. He runs, he's a part of a very particular demographic. But I've even seen him transition and change his beliefs based on the kids that sit in front of him. And I've been a teacher for long enough to see some pretty big changes. And in the last 20 years, we used to fight. My class used to have heavy debates on gay marriage. Then they got bored of it because they're like, who cares? Then I started seeing heavy debates on gay adoption. Who cares? Then I saw heavy debates on trans issues. And those are kind of getting thrown out the window as we go. For example, this year I had a student come up to me and say, "Joanna," because I've never done this before, "are you going to ask people their preferred pronouns so we know how to properly address them?" And I'm like, "See, that's why I teach, because I learn something from you all every freaking day." Now, out of all of the kids that I asked that for, and we talked about it, how many wrote they, them? One, maybe two.
Yeah, yeah,
But what's cool is I got to have that discussion with my grade 7 and 8s. And the grade 7 and 8s listen, and they understand that there could be this diversity, and they try to, even though they might joke, especially some of the younger guys, they're uncomfortable, right? They're uncomfortable, so they joke. They're uncomfortable, and so sometimes they make fun or they tease a little bit. But then it's my job to say, okay, I get why you're uncomfortable there. I get why you're making that joke. But can we talk about the reason you're making the joke? And so just to
yeah,
talk it
yeah.
through like that, I think is so
Yeah,
incredible.
I thought gay jokes were really funny until two of my best friends came out as gay when I was in high school. So, and
Listen, I still think some
maybe
gay
I better
jokes are
rethink
funny.
this. Yeah, exactly.
But when
Yeah,
you were in high school and I was in high school, my gosh, I remember, I've looked back because I grew up in the 80s, and I look back at the 80s and 90s movies, and I think about the language that was used,
yeah.
particularly about gay men. Nobody talked about gay women, I don't think, for a very long time. But that language, like the F word and not the swear word, but that F word was in every single
Oh,
movie as an
hundred
attack. It
percent.
was
Yeah.
100% common. So we have to be able to have those conversations. Now everybody knows we can't say that word, and that's the part of censorship. And I want to come back to censorship a little bit because I think it's incredibly important. Because I think a lot of people know they can't say the word, but they really don't like it. Any word for that matter. They don't like it, and they still think it's funny, and they just don't say it. But nobody's having the conversation that needs to be had. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Um, Not really. Just go through that again.
I don't want to censor, and we're talking about obviously slang or derogatory words for gay men.
Okay.
I don't want to silence people that still have homophobic thoughts, because I can't fix that thought if I can't hear you say it. I
Yeah,
can't have the discussion anymore. I want to be able to
I
have
can't
the discussion.
remember the last time I heard that phrase used in front of me.
Hmm.
But if it were ever used in front of me, I'd say, "Dude, not cool." Like,
Right.
just
But I
don't
would
please
like
don't
to
use
have
that
that
word.
discussion.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's the thing about censorship, right? Censorship, because we talked about cancel culture, censorship. It's funny because I really don't want to hear a bigot or a white supremacist or a whoever getting up there and spewing garbage. But at the end of the day, that individual thinks that. So you know what? Get on stage and say it so we can deal with you. I used to think this way about Jerry Springer. Remember that show? And
Yeah,
all
yeah,
those
yeah.
morons would get in and they'd wear their KKK hats and then they'd take them off and then they'd fight. And I'm like, you know, a lot of people would think, oh, well, you're just highlighting it. No, 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 no. Nobody walks away from Jerry Springer going, wow, those guys are brilliant,
No, no, no,
because we let
no.
the
There has to
idiocy.
be a place. Yeah, I agree with you. We have to hash this out as a society, and if you bury it, it doesn't disappear. It just goes underground. So
And it gets scarier and more
and
violent.
it gets scarier and gets reinforced to be scarier and more marginal. Like you get into the QAnon universe and all this other stuff that
There it is,
is
right?
just wacko, but is fed by denunciation by people who want to marginalize it and cut it off Twitter or whatever, right? So
Mm.
that doesn't seem to be working too well, is all I can say on that. I got to tell you one political story. You said bigot, so I've got this one story. It was
I'm so
before I was
excited right
it was before I was in the Ontario caucus, but it was told to me by Ernie Eves, and they were in the late 70s, early 80s. They were having a big battle on Bill Davis was premier about whether to extend French language services,
now. Right.
and big battle in the Tory caucus. A lot of the rural MPPs didn't want to see extended French language services.
Right.
So they're having this big battle in caucus. And this guy named Lorne Henderson, who represented Sarnia Lambton, stands up. And Lorne was about 350 pounds.
Okay.
He was a farmer. His each finger was like a cucumber. His nose
Me
was
too.
bulbous, like just
Yes.
really big guy. But he kind of had the common sense of the rural farmer. So he
There it
stands
is.
up and he says, "Well, I don't like where this is going, Premier. I don't think we should be going down this route, Premier. I have bigamists in my riding." And what he meant was bigots, but he
Bigots.
he
Yeah.
misspoke and he said bigamists, and everybody starts
Probably
giggling.
my
Tee hee
favorite
hee.
mistake
He
I've
says,
ever heard.
he
Yep.
says, "Oh yeah, yeah, you laugh at me, but you all have bigamists in your riding too."
Oh,
So that's whenever somebody says bigots now, I always think of bigamists. So there you go.
bigots. Oh my gosh. I think all of that is just, and then I'd like to roll. I realize we've already been on an hour, but I'm having such a good time. But I would understand if you need to go. Otherwise, we can let it go
No,
a little
I'm,
bit
I'm good
longer.
for a little while longer, Joe. Let's keep it
All
going.
right. You cut me off then, Tony. You say, okay, Joanna, enough's enough. I'm a teacher. I can go for a solid 8 hours. So I think that that's a really good point too, because we've kind of talked about a lot of these big issues, and you said something earlier that I really would like to speak to, is the idea that as a politician, and speaking about the state of our politics right now, this notion about getting reelected and only having a certain amount of juice. You called it rocket fuel. What'd you call it?
Rocket
Rocket
rocket sauce.
rocket sauce. You only have so much. So what are you going to spend it on? I think is incredibly important. And you also spoke to the notion of, the internal Conservative Party maybe trying to teach their members how to be a little bit more emotionally driven. And all I can think in my head is, like all of those movies like Wag the Dog or any political satirical movie where we teach the candidate what to wear, how to tilt their head, how to roll up their sleeve at the right time, how to do this instead of this. I swear to God, if I became a politician, I just pointed at everybody because I'm like, this means the same thing. Means the same thing. We've just switched it out and we think as though we're being respectful, we're not.
Yeah,
And all of this play, all of this acting that goes on, and that goes on in every single party, no holds barred, the acting to get your to get your things passed, hopefully that you really like, and the secondary, maybe primary, to get reelected. That's your goal, right? That's our goal. And I can't help thinking as a politics teacher, this is the flaw in democracy. The flaw in democracy is the performative aspect where I'm so busy worrying about getting reelected or worrying about what I can get, even though this is the right thing to do. What can I get through the legislature? Is is the real reason people are very disenfranchised with the entire and again, every party across the board. My favorite quote from Lincoln was is I'd like to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky. It's my favorite quote, and it depresses me every time I say it. But I think that's the flaw.
Yeah.
That's our
Well,
flaw.
that's it's not a flaw. It's human nature. Okay. Like that's the first thing I'd say. Like politics. Look, I'm going to be unapologetic about certain aspects of politics. First of all, it's partisan. Oh, it would be so much better if people would agree more. No, no. The whole purpose of politics is to debate issues, to be passionate about issues, to
Mhm.
disagree passionately. You should be respectful, but disagree passionately with somebody,
And
and then
intelligent.
yeah, and then it'll
Disagree
be resolved.
passionately and
Sorry, say that
intelligently.
again. Say that
Disagree
again.
passionately, intelligently, because if I have to
Yeah.
watch the House argue about things and people slam on desks one more time and just inadvertently go through the speaker to call this person a name, I can't anymore.
Yeah, no, but yeah, and you're right. That performative stuff wears thin after a while. There's no question about
Mhm.
it. But it should be the place where you disagree fundamentally on some really important issues. If you can't do it there, you can't do it anywhere. So I don't have a lot of time for people who want politicians to agree more. But look, you know, this is this isn't a debating society. You can only affect change if you are elected as a
Right.
government. Being elected as an opposition member doesn't count.
You
Okay,
got nothing. Yes.
you got nothing, and it's the most
Unless you're in
frustrating
the
job in the
minority.
world. Believe me,
Yeah,
I
I
had it.
can't.
I was in politics for 25 years. I was only 4 years in opposition. Those were the four worst years, bar
Right.
none. Yeah, you,
Hmm.
you can be the worst backbencher. If you're in government, it's better to be the worst backbencher in government than to be a front bencher in opposition. No question
Let me
about it.
just let me just give a little point here because again we have a lot of people listening who even in Canada who don't quite get the system. In Canada, our prime minister and our legislature is elected together. They're elected together. It's called a fusion of powers, and it allows a majority government pretty much to pass whatever it is they want to pass, as long as it doesn't tip the constitutional issues,
Yeah.
right? As long as you
So
keep in confines of the constitution. It gives them a lot of power and a lot of privilege to do whatever the heck they want, which is
so
different
so
than the
I would
States.
argue that the Prime Minister of Canada has the most power in the elected world.
Absolutely.
Most power
If they have a majority. If they have a
if they
majority
have a
government.
majority.
Hmm.
He appoints the cabinet. He appoints every member of the upper chamber.
Hmm.
Every senator that whose term is there's a vacancy, they
Yeah.
appoint every single senator. They appoint every single Supreme Court justice. You talk about fusion,
So much
executive,
power.
legislative, judiciary, all coming from one, except for one exception, one man.
That short 6 months. Yeah.
Yeah, that short 6 months, Kim Campbell. So yeah, that's a lot of power. That's a
It's
lot
a
of
lot of
power. And
power.
I'll
Hmm.
tell you, look, being in the inner cabinet as I was with Stephen Harper, people will scoff at this, I'm sure, but he gave us a lot of room to debate a lot of issues. We debated issues in caucus, we debated issues in cabinet.
Hmm.
It wasn't just Stephen Harper making decisions, but if he wanted to make a decision, he could.
Hmm.
He's the prime minister. There's a lot of
Hmm.
deferential authority given to the Canadian prime
He
minister,
appoints the
more
cabinet.
yeah, more
Yeah.
so than in the US by far because
Mhm.
you have division of powers. More
Yeah.
so in the UK, where things have evolved in the UK, where different cabinet members have a lot of authority apart from the prime minister, and within the prime minister's caucus, she or he faces continual push and pull and opposition. There's something called the 1922 Committee in the UK Conservative Party, where they are backbenchers who force the prime minister to come to their meetings and to explain things and justify things. We don't have anything like that in Canada. I'm telling you right now. Now, a caucus can work that way, but quite frankly, there's a lot of people in caucus who spend their time sucking up to the leader or prime minister because
Sure.
that's the
They
best
want
way
a
to
better
get
job.
a better plum, a better appointment, a better cabinet position, a better opposition position. So and I saw that frequently. I didn't care because I'd already had a political career and I had the power to walk away. But
Mhm.
many people, oh, prime minister, that's a great point. You are 100% right on that. Well, wait, can we debate it for a minute or two? That'd be nice, you know.
I
So
can't.
look, that's human, but I'm telling you, that's human nature.
It is.
Politics is human nature in a specific field. So if you don't like how politics is being played out, look in the mirror, folks. I'm sorry, but that's the reality.
Absolutely. People ask me, I've been approached by a couple of people to talk about running, and I said, I don't think I'm going to do well. I don't think I'm going to do well. And here's why. I'm not very good at tempering. I'm not very great at compromise. I love discussion. I love discussion. But for example, if I was running in a under any party, one of my main tenets would have to be: listen, do you want more social services or less? And then we can talk about what your tax base is. But you're going to have to first decide over here, because anybody that steps to you and says, I'm going to give you more for less, you're being sold land that you shouldn't be buying. It's just not going to happen. I don't believe it can happen. And I think that's also when people blame politicians, 100% you have to look at the population and what you're voting for. I mean, we voted for a gentleman in Ontario who promised a buck a beer. That was an actual thing he said. Now, I might not have voted for him, but the people that voted for him who are now complaining, I like to just roll that clip. Guys, he said who he was. You just didn't believe it. And you like the fact you thought your taxes were going to go down, which seems to be this main sort of, staple of what people are, because they're making decisions based on how much money's in their pocket, because it's hard. I
Well,
get it.
they have humans have a right to do that. That's kind
Absolutely.
of it's is it in my pocket to buy a new bicycle for my 7-year old, or is it going to some wasteful government program? That's a continuing theme in
Wasteful,
political
right?
life, right?
So you have to go in the hospital for 10 minutes, and then you were like, oh, we should have put more money here. Or,
No,
oh, like,
then they would say, the doctors are being paid too much. So then there'd be that. But look, the fact of the matter is, politics is very reflective. Sometimes there's a time lag, I grant you that, but it is reflective of society. And when it isn't, the bums are thrown out, and
mhm,
the new government
the new
party is
guard takes
elected,
over.
and then
Yeah.
people's confidence in the government increases, and the
Mhm.
popularity of the prime minister increases. We saw this in 2015 with Justin Trudeau, and then of course, you know, he has to make decisions, and some decisions are good and some decisions are bad. And now he has a negative popularity, and the liberal brand is being eroded. That's just that's the cycle. I'm not blaming
Yeah.
Trudeau. I'm just saying, like, you've been in
Yeah.
power, dude, since 2015.
A
They're
long
not
time.
going to love you anymore. They want this or they want that, or why didn't you do this on Indigenous, or why didn't you
Yeah.
do this on this file. So that's the cycle, and that's the good thing about representative democracy is you get a chance to kick the bums out if you want to. But let me go back to your point, which is why you wouldn't feel comfortable in that kind of politics. And this is the point that has to be emphasized if you're teaching a politics class. Politics is a team sport. It's a
Hmm.
team sport. You have the debates internally. At a caucus, I've seen rip roaring debates, people yelling, people screaming, people, shaking their fist at their fellow colleague. And don't forget, caucus for your listeners are of the same party. It's when you
Right.
caucus, just your party is represented in your caucus, and
Hmm.
that's where you debate where you're standing on issues. And you have the debate, you conclude the debate, You come to a decision as a collective, and that is the decision. And if you, as a caucus member, feel that you cannot abide by that decision, you better quit now. You better quit that caucus and stand as an independent, whatever.
Right.
But you cannot walk out of that caucus room and say, I disagree with all of my colleagues. This is where I stand on this issue. You're done. Because
Yeah.
no one, your constituents may thank you for like a half a minute, but
Yeah.
what you're
You're
doing
gonna have no
is
power.
you are making it tougher for every single other caucus member who have to answer to their constituents about an unpopular decision. Well, why are
Mhm.
you taking that position? So and so isn't taking that position. And so the idea of solidarity is how I would put it, is
Yeah.
so that you stand or fall together. You make the decision. Everybody gets their say. Everybody gets their 5 minutes or their 2 minutes at the microphone. But at the end of the day, you make a decision collectively and you stand by that decision. If you cannot do that, you do not deserve to govern, because government means making tough decisions. And if you
Yeah.
cannot have that solidarity of the team, you are not able to make the tough decisions that are necessary. And the greatest master of his caucus in parliamentary history probably was Brian Mulroney, who
Ugh.
was down at 13% in the polls, but every caucus member stood behind him because of the way he worked his caucus. He respected his caucus. If your spouse was in the hospital, he would visit your spouse in the hospital. He did crazy stuff that
Right.
was so time consuming, but was important for caucus solidarity behind him. And that's a is it a lost art? It's not a lost art, but it's an art that is losing favor, and it has consequences. Justin Trudeau does not have the same uh, caucus solidarity that he had 6 years ago, because he doesn't do some of the little things that are important. Anyway, that be that as it may, that's why. And so when if somebody in your class says, I'd like to run in politics,
Mhm.
just remember, it's a team sport, okay? Like it really is. And so, yeah,
Mhm.
you get to have influence. Yes, you get to represent your community. Yes, you get to push certain policies. All of that is true. And it's exhilarating when those policies are adopted and becomes the policy of your province or country. All of that is absolutely true. And it's the greatest job on earth, as far as I'm concerned. I loved every minute of it, or almost every minute of it. And but you have to understand the rules of the game. And it's
Mhm.
not all about you and where you stand. It's all about your seatmates. It's all about
Mhm.
your common goals. You gotta put some water into the wine, man, or it's not going to work.
And I think it's important because, yeah, it is about common goals, right? But I'm wondering with this voting apathy, with the disengagement of a lot of people, like you just described a system that I buy, that I want to watch. But because all of those caucuses are behind closed doors and we never want to admit that we've disagreed and come to a conclusion, I think that might be a failure. I think that might be what's lacking. I would love to see
Yeah,
any
because
party sit down in a room.
the media will crucify you if there
There's
is a disagreement in your own
right.
caucus. Do you think the
Mhm.
media is going to record, wow, there was a refreshing debate in the government caucus about this issue and people disagreed, good for them? No, 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 they're never going to write that. they're going to
But
they're
what if
going to
the
write or
party?
post, there was
What if the
division,
party started? Yeah. What
people
if the party
disagreed with
started
the prime
publicizing?
minister. Yeah,
Yeah. But what
so
if
you
the
can't
party
do it.
started publicizing it? What if they started publicizing? What if they said, you know what? We're really tired of sound bites because that's how the media works. Because let's be honest, we want to see 140 characters in a Twitter or we want to see a 30-second TikTok. So what if the party finally said, I'm going to take control over this? Did we have a great debate? Yes. Did person A, B, and C disagree? Yes. But as a party, we needed to come to some sort of conclusion in the sense of how do we work all of these opinions and how do we still come up what's best for Ontario, what's best for Canada, and how do we do that? I am telling you, people would buy into that.
Yeah,
They'd
the
want, and
problem.
then they would see an authenticity that they think
Yeah,
they're
and
missing.
authenticity is the holy grail of politics these days. I totally get
It
that.
really
The the
is.
the the problem is that the whole idea of caucus secrecy is so you can speak your mind, right? And if that is broken, like we had a guy when I was first elected as part of the Harper government, we had a guy, Garth Turner, who represented Milton, who would attend the caucus meetings, walk out of the caucus meetings, and post what was going on at the caucus meeting on his blog. So we said to him, like, dude,
Yeah.
you can't do that. Like, I'm
Dude.
I'm speaking from the heart. My constituents may not like the way I'm speaking about an issue. Maybe I was speaking pro LGBT, but my constituents weren't quite there yet. I don't want them to know necessarily what I'm pushing because it's going to affect me electorally, dude.
There you
So
go.
stop posting on the blog what we're talking about when we're talking freely to one another as colleagues. He continued to do it. We had to kick him out of caucus.
Yeah, well, for
He
sure.
was
Well, but
gone.
again, that's just one person pulling out excerpts, pulling out sound bites, pulling out whatever, putting on his blog. What I'm talking about is, and you made a very, very good, very honest point. Look, my people aren't ready for these viewpoints yet, but I'm wondering, I'm just imagining, idealizing, I don't know, what a world looks like when if we have those honest conversations consistently, and even if our constituents aren't necessarily there yet, how many more people will buy into the system, will buy into an idea, will buy into an honesty? Because I think all people say, all politicians, and they'll fill in the blank. And I'm like, you know what? People don't go into politics to get rich. People
No,
don't go into politics. They go in because they think they can make a difference. And I
they
think
go
that
in. They go in for the adulation. I'm just
the
kidding.
image that you see, everybody likes the t-shirt. If you
Yeah,
see somebody representing, and they're so polished and they're so this and they're so that, that's where you lose us. You
yeah.
started this whole conversation talking about Trudeau. Um, the older one, not the younger one. And obviously you would have been coming off the heels or right around the time of the War Measures Act and the FLQ and all of that. And this guy gets in national, gets a media, correspondent in his face with a microphone in his face and the famous, how dare you? Do you really think? Do you think this? Do you think you can do that? And he, with a smirk on his face, says,
Just watch
just
me.
watch.
Yeah,
Now, you could love him or hate him because of that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then that was, but
I kind
oh,
of love him now for that.
I miss that honesty. Do you know what I mean? I
Yeah, yeah,
miss that honesty. I miss
yeah.
that. I truly miss that. And you will see minutes of it. But I think if we can, I think politicians think they're going to lose a lot more than gain if we put more things front and center. I
Well,
would
I
have
mean,
loved,
how
yeah,
do you measure like? Okay, I hear what you're saying, and I agree. Authenticity is valued now. How do you deal with the Trump factor then? Because
I
there,
don't think he's authentic.
you don't
I
think
don't
he's
think
authentic?
Oh, I think that guy, I would love to, I think that guy knew exactly, or his people knew exactly how he was playing it.
Yeah,
I've even thought that misspelling words in his tweets was
yeah,
purposeful.
yeah,
I've even thought that his base, I think he did. I am obviously not a Trump fan. I think he did a really good job, unfortunately, of tapping into fear, tapping into dissension, deciding how he could manipulate that, how he could get those people to vote for him, and a guy with a the apprentice became president. That wasn't because I don't think that was authentic at all. That was the best example of the manipulation of all media sources.
okay,
I
okay,
think he did a
fair enough.
great job, even right down to when he debated Clinton and stood right behind her. I'm like,
Yeah,
who taught that guy that move? That's a good move. That that's a good TV move,
yeah,
And then I thought
yeah,
of
yeah,
Reagan and Nixon, and I mean, sorry, I thought of Nixon and JFK being on
yeah.
TV for the first time, and who got to manipulate that source. So yeah, and everybody blames Trump, and I'm like, guys, 70 million of you voted for him. You can't
How do
blame.
you how do you teach your students in this age of media manipulation? How do you teach them to be critically assessing media?
It's so hard. So I start right in it's so funny you say that. So I teach, my school goes from 7 to 12. I have a 7 and 8 global issues course that I just created, because they take more courses at my school than they would at a regular elementary. So this is an extra course. And we just did a unit on um, social media and the media in general, and real and fake news and things like that. And the only way I can start them doing it is by finding stories. And this, we just did this assignment. I said, go find stories you think are fascinating. Go find stories that drew your attention, or if you were on Twitter or whatever, and then go find out who wrote them. And then where is it posted? Who posted it? Who fact checked it? And then I want you to go find at least 3 other sources that talk about the same thing and talk about it in a similar way. Can you do that? For example, I had a kid who said, Joanna, the CIA just admitted to that the Illuminati existed. I said, honey, no, they didn't. And he goes, yes, it says right here, CIA.gov. I said, what else does that URL say? Because it was like this long, right? Afterwards. I'm like, there you go. But that's as easy as it is, right? And I also think we got to use some common sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
I sometimes just think we have to use common sense, and we also have to be aware of what drives us as a society and where the ridiculousness is, i.e., who gets married, who gets divorced, who cheated on who, what this celebrity's doing, how much this celebrity's paying. Look, if you're going to be interested in all that, take ownership, because that doesn't matter. But for the other things, like COVID is a great example.
Oh, our first mention of COVID on this program.
The first mention. Well, who wants to keep talking
Not
about?
bad.
I'd love to never talk about it again. But
Yeah.
the idea that everybody's a virologist, I
Yeah.
can't. Right? Everybody's like, I did my research, and I saw a funny TikTok where it said, "Listen, unless you ran clinical trials that have been peer approved, you did
Yeah.
no such thing."
Yeah.
And I like that. I like that. The fact that, just because we have this incredibly powerful thing at our source, or that it doesn't come easy, and nor a lot of people are like, well, it was better when we were kids, when we had to go to the library and spend 17 hours there. I'm like, was it? Because those books were all decided who wrote them, why they got to write them, who funded them, what was considered legitimate information. And I grew up in an era where, guess what? Nobody in my high school or even at university spoke about residential schools at all. And I took politics and history.
Yeah.
So there's fake news, or at least what I get more worried about than fake news, which is ironic, is the omission. I worried about what they don't talk
Sure.
about, because
Sure.
I don't
No,
even know
fair
to
enough.
fact check,
Fair enough.
right?
Yeah. But that's why we need educated young people who are critically thinking, right?
Mhm.
That
Yep,
seems to be our common
absolutely.
goal here, Joe. Yeah. 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 Well,
I'm
we're
good. Well,
almost at an hour and a half.
I love it. It's my longest podcast ever. I
No
appreciate
way.
you so much for coming. It is. No, I try to be around. Somebody told me once, like, it's a 45, you should be 45 minutes. That's the drive to work.
Well, Joe Rogan's
Now,
3.5 hours, the one I'm listening to right now. So
that's it. We're going to have a whole other podcast where we're going to fight about Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, and I'm
okay.
going to add on there, just because, Ben Shapiro, because I know you're probably like, yeah, Ben on that list somewhere.
No, I
I
only
like
listened. I've only heard Ben Shapiro once when he was a guest on Joe Rogan, and I didn't. I found him quite annoying, actually. But anyway, that's just me.
he is incredibly annoying. But thank you so incredibly much. I really appreciate you coming on. I would love to have you back. I think we have a
Oh,
list
thank
of
you.
things we could discuss. Can I ask you a quick question? Favorite Canadian Prime Minister ever? You
I know
can't
I'm
say
supposed to say. I know I'm
Stephen.
supposed to say Stephen Harper.
You can't.
Uh,
No. You can't say
I would say overall, either Harper or Mulrooney. One they
Mulroney.
did, yeah, because Mulrooney achieved some big things, and he was eventually vilified for it. But Harper was also a genius at getting a bunch of incremental things done that cumulatively were important. So yeah, they had they were it was different times. The '80s versus
Mhm.
2006 to 15,
Absolutely.
different times. So
Favorite liberal?
favorite liberal,
I'll give you provincial or federal.
yeah,
You just shifted in your seat. You're like, ah,
yeah. I know it's no one has ever asked me that before. Well, definitely, I would go with I would. Well, Edward Blake. I always had a soft spot for Edward Blake.
Blake. Wow.
I
Why?
know he was never prime minister,
Yeah.
but he really pushed for free trade at a time when McDonald was pushing his sort of Canada First policies, which I
Wow.
thought was
Go back.
eventually where we ended up 100 years later.
Right, right,
So
right.
I actually did when I was a high school student. I did a whole essay on Edward Blake. So I guess I'm going to stick with Edward Blake.
You're going to stick with Edward. I think that's fairly safe. I think that's a safe, and he's really old. Like it's a really long time ago.
Yeah,
Well, thank
I
you
could
so
I could have said
much.
Sir Charles Tupper, but nobody would know who that was. So
Tupper. I know Nova Scotia, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. History
a good
teacher.
Nova
I got that
Scotian.
stuff jammed in my head, no matter if I want it to be there or not.
Yeah.
I really appreciate. Thank you for sticking around. I can't wait to have you back on. And to all our listeners, thank you for hanging out. We will see you next Tuesday, same bat time, same bat channel. Have a good day, guys. Dismissed.